In a world dominated by Kindles, slick book covers, and glossy TikTok videos, there is an explicit need to state why you should buy and read old literature. It's easy to overlook an old book. The worn bindings, the small fonts, and lack of online information on the authors create a barrier to entry for readers. Our world is consumed by an obsession for novelty. Antiquarian bookstores are going defunct, called legacy booksellers in the industry. Let's suppose that you would like to read Plato in 2023. The Goliath of modern publishing encourages you to buy a $29.99 fresh translation from Amazon done by a middling adjunct professor. The language is sparse and updated for the current zeitgeist of recognizing and supporting the left-wing political premises of the author. On the other hand, the 150-year-old Benjamin Jowett translations of Plato are a masterwork. Jowett was a renowned theologian, master of an Oxford college, and held the Regius Professorship of Greek. He translated Thucydides and Plato with adept attention to the intricacies of ancient Greek. Where can you find Mr. Jowett's Plato translations? In used bookstores, they are in the clearance rack, selling for a few dollars, and often in a damaged trade paperback format. The old books once reigned supreme as classroom staples. As bookstores churn through inventory, and as younger generations come up in the book industry, there is a high probability of these works gradually disappearing from old stores. I should take a moment to prove to you, the viewer, that old books have a greater value than new ones. I'll start with two books on the same subject, published well over 150 years apart. The most recent comprehensive history of ancient Greece that I own is Peter Green's 1990 Alexander to Actium, The Historical Evolution of the Hellenistic Age. It is 970 pages and lists tens of thousands of citations. On paper, this should be an excellent introduction for the serious reader of this subject. The author attended Cambridge and teaches at Princeton. However, there are some serious flaws present in the book. The first is that Mr. Green is a Marxist, and this book is permeated with a Marxist lens of class struggle and economics that selectively portrays various historical figures with undue criticism. The Roman business community, for example, is a consolidated bourgeois class searching for a revolution in the social order. To anyone familiar with The Ancient City by Numa Denis Fustel de Coulanges, the actual values of the Roman business owners were predicated upon the values of hearth, home, and civitas. Mr. Green labels Demochares an intransigent Gaullist, somehow now accommodated among the more pliable men of Vichy. In just this quote, the author relies on many presuppositions and his own subjective views of Demochares. Anyone who knows Marxist literature knows that they tend, as a group, to insert their subjective opinions as fact and unquestionable. He also describes the famous Roman author Xenophon as deficient in creative imagination. Xenophon's work Anabasis was described as the greatest adventure story ever told in the 2nd century AD in Plutarch's Lives of the Illustrious Men. The second flaw is that Mr. Green frequently switches between arcane language and 1980s pop culture terms to add color in his book. This undermines the work's ability to faithfully describe ancient Greece. It also suffers from a lack of internal structure and inconsistent attention to the different aspects of Greek society. So if not this immense tome, where should a reader look for a properly ordered book on the ancient world? There are thousands of possible choices, but my favorite is the 1787 Manual of Classical Literature by Johann Eschenburg. This book has been out of print since 1854. As a public domain copyright-free book, you can find a link to the full book on Google in the description. This book was hugely popular in classical departments in the 19th century world of Germany and the United Kingdom. It is 690 pages, but the dense typeface makes it similar in word count to the first book. Starting out on the first page of the book, differences in quality are apparent. In a modern book, especially for a well-regarded work of the Western canon, the introduction tends to range from 10 to 100 pages. Penguin Classics are the most guilty publisher of this. The introduction's author is usually a tenured professor at a liberal arts college, and the introduction will fuss over the original author's sexuality, poor finances, and lack of contemporary critical acclaim in their lifetime. There is often minimal respect or praise of the original author. Contrast this with N.W. Fiske's introduction to the Manual of Classical Literature. Mr. Fiske translated the entire work from German and starts his introduction thus. It will be natural to ask why this book is offered to the public. The translator knows not how to introduce the reasons in a better way than by first allowing the author himself to explain the design and character of the original work. The next 2 pages are excerpts written by Mr. Eschenburg over 7 different editions of the manual. Mr. Fiske's continues after this. In view of this account of the character, design, and reputation of the original work, it is easy to see the reasons why it should be presented to the scholars of our own country. Many instructors have felt the want of a comprehensive textbook in the Department of Classical Literature and Antiquities. After much inquiry, the translator has been able to find no work which, on the whole, seems so well adapted for the object as Mr. Eschenburg's manual. Mr. Fiske explains in 1 page the methodology of how he conducted his translation. He concludes his introduction thus. The work is now offered as a humble contribution to the service of the public, and commended to the candid examination of the scholar, in the hope that, under the blessing of him, in whom is the fountain of all wisdom and knowledge, it may prove an auxiliary of some value in the cause of liberal and good education. Mr. Fiske treats his task as translator with humility and grace, giving thanks to God and seeing the divine mission of classical education manifested in a single book. The introduction is merely 7 pages, with 5 pages consisting of excerpts from Mr. Eschenburg himself. Imagine briefly the vast difference in scholastic mindset necessary to spend years translating this massive tome, only to present yourself as an invisible conduit of the original author. The systemization of the manual is organized with mathematical precision, vastly different from Mr. Green's 229 pages of convoluted notes and bibliography. In the manual, footnotes are set in smaller typefaces. The manual also divides the content into parts, sections, and subsections, with a system of Roman numerals and internal referencing. At the back of the book, an index of Greek words, index of Latin words, geographical index, and a general index all serve to ensure the reader is never lost. Every paragraph is numbered and designed for accessibility and cross-referencing. The reader is also not delayed in entering the content of the book. A 1-page preface of the 3rd and 4th edition means brief acknowledgments focusing on the knowledge of God and of Jesus, whom to know is eternal life. So what is the content in the book? Part 1 is classical geography and chronology. Part 2 is the mythology of the Greeks and Romans. Part 3 is Greek and Roman antiquities. Part 4 is archaeology of literature and art. Part 5 is history of historic literature, Greek and Roman. Each of these parts is divided into different sections, discussing wide-ranging topics, such as the original works of the Apostolic Fathers, full descriptions of influential painting and poetry, and even an esoteric and exoteric distinguishing of ancient Greek philosophy. Nothing is omitted from the book, and readers will find every subject treated in full and with a full attempt made to be objective. Lavish hand-drawn plates, an antique term for illustrations, are throughout the book depicting central ideas such as geography according to the ancient Ptolemaic geocentric model. The ruins of Athens, Corinth, Sparta, and temples of Janus and Baalbek are illustrated with faithful accuracy. These are in stark contrast to Mr. Green's glossy pictures of museum artifacts. And how does Mr. Eschenburg write? I will quote his first paragraph in full of Greek and Roman mythology. Among the early nations of antiquity, before the art of writing had come into general use, tradition was the only mode of preserving and spreading the knowledge of remarkable events. Many circumstances contributed to give the early traditions a fabulous character: the love of the marvelous, a natural tendency of the mind to employ symbolical and allegorical images to express ideas for which no definite words have been appropriated, and a disposition to eulogize and exaggerate the exploits of ancestors, all conspired to load history and fact with a mass of fiction so that it became impossible for later inquirers to distinguish accurately between the true and false. The author strikes a balance between relaying information and maintaining an objective tone. This book predates all modern conceptions of a critical or deconstructionist lens. The author is reverent toward the subject and knows his 18th and 19th century audience of students is likely to read his work before embarking of years of Greek and Latin study. The book is astonishing in its depth and breadth of knowledge. It is a deep shame that such scholastic endeavors are forgotten today. I must return now to my central point in order to prevent this video from taking too much of your time. I assert in my subjective opinion that most books written before World War II aim to respect their subjects. In 2023, we exist in a cultural landscape devastated for over 75 years by scholars who write too narrowly on subjects, who aim to reduce their subjects to mere elements of themselves, and are disconnected from the foundational Western canon which shaped the academic institutions they now control. In the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, critical interpretations of the canon were novel. I want to give credit to these authors. They often brought out underserved areas of study and gained new insights into old works. Even early Marxists in the Frankfurt School were highly educated in the classical tradition and were equipped with a broad lens. Yet we are decades past them. Our familiarity with our own past is severed irreversibly. A reader walking into a Barnes & Noble today finds it impossible to find a non-fiction book cognizant of its own biases. These are small-minded, and they despise the things they claim to understand. I would assert, very plainly, that the first step in understanding a subject is to love it. To love something is to respect it, to take it with all of its flaws, and in so doing, to transcend it in purpose. When a reader opens a book, they become entwined with the author's soul and mind for multiple hours. As a reactionary or conservative, or as a Christian, you must be highly conscientious to only consume works that align with that broad telos. I hope over the course of this video, I have convinced you of the objective superiority of older books. Both books I have discussed today are listed in the description below. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. Have a nice day.